I am anonymous. We are not a party, not a campaign, and not a public relations machine. We are a voice that cuts through theater, noise, and propaganda. And tonight, what matters is not the branding, not the bravado, and not the chest thumping on television. What matters is what was actually being pushed, what was being implied, and what it reveals about Donald Trump, his inner circle, and the dangerous performance politics wrapped around war, alliances, and power. The original story opens with Jesse Waters declaring a Fox News alert and saying the country was less than an hour away from a presidential address to the nation about what he called epic fury. From there, the message was immediate and dramatic. The Pentagon was reportedly planning for 2 possible ground assaults, one to seize Iran's so-called crown jewel, Karg Island, and another to capture highly enriched uranium. Both missions were framed as high risk, high reward, and potentially the final blow that could force the mullahs to surrender. According to that telling, the Pentagon had doubled its war assets in the Middle East, a sign that a ground assault could be imminent. Waters described aircraft flying low and slow, conducting attack runs and preparing to provide close air support, while stressing that nobody really knew what could happen because the president wanted to stay unpredictable and keep his options open. He added that the USS Tripoli was in theater with 3,500 sailors and Marines maintaining peak readiness, and that another platform had the capability to secretly insert SEAL teams near shore for raids and sabotage. Then came the supposed state of peace talks. The transcript presents the commander-in-chief saying that Iran's new regime president was less radicalized and more intelligent than his predecessors, and had asked the United States for a ceasefire. But the response, in that version, was brutally conditional. The United States would consider it only when the Strait of Hormuz was clear and open, and until then it would keep blasting Iran into oblivion, or, as the quote put it, back to the Stone Ages. That was the tone. Not diplomacy first, not caution first, destruction first, then maybe discussion, and that gets to the core of the Trump pattern. He sells recklessness as strength, improvisation as strategy, and spectacle as leadership. But when you strip away the swagger, what you often find is a man addicted to leverage, headlines, and domination, even when the stakes involve global war. Waters went on to argue that Iran did not merely want a ceasefire, it needed one. He said the Iranian economy had only weeks of oxygen left, that within 3 weeks it could face total collapse, that inflation was over 70%, the currency was collapsing, and half the country was unemployed. He reminded viewers that Iran had used deadly force to crush an uprising the year before because the economy was already bad, and claimed it was now 10 times worse. He warned that when the war was over, more violent unrest could follow. He said steel plants were being blown to shreds, firepower was down to a trickle, and that where Iran had once fired 170 ballistic missiles at the onset of the war, it had recently fired only 3. He said their drones had been reverse-engineered, and their manufacturing plants were being steadily struck, calling those drones the Toyota Corolla of drones because they were cheap and easy to make. He added that drone attacks were down 83%, that there were underground reports of fractures between Iran's president and the Guard, infighting over whether to take a deal, and fear that showing weakness could invite a coup or revolution in a police state. He cited H.R. McMaster as saying the regime was already a dead man crawling, with missiles raining down, and the population no longer buying what the regime was saying. Then came the broader Trump doctrine, or at least the Fox version of it. One sound bite insisted Trump would not allow fake negotiations to become a delay tactic, that the United States would always be prepared to talk, but would not allow talks, or the failure of talks, to stop its ability to defend and protect the country from a real threat. Waters then pivoted to North Korea, warning that diplomacy could seduce a superpower into thinking it was in control until a rogue state shocked the world with a nuclear weapon. The next argument was that Iran had been aiming to become the next North Korea, except run by radical Shiite clerics with missiles that could eventually reach the U.S. mainland. This is how fear gets packaged for television: compress the world into a binary, glorify force, and leave no room for complexity. And Trump thrives in exactly that environment because he has always preferred emotional domination over disciplined statecraft. Waters said the president was expected to define victory that night and explain what had been achieved in 4 weeks. He claimed more than 12,000 targets had been struck, and only a few thousand remained. That Iran's navy, air force, and air defenses were gone. That its missiles were severely degraded, and that its defense industrial base had been obliterated so it could not rearm. He said Iran's proxies had been pummeled, decapitation strikes were continuing against leadership, and that the IDF had just taken out one of the country's top engineers. A man, he said, was responsible for underground sites for Hezbollah and Assad. He said Netanyahu believed Israel had hit 100% of enemy targets, and that Iran no longer posed a threat. He argued Iran should have taken the deal a month earlier, that it could no longer use its military to build a fortress around its secret nuclear program, and that the program was still alive, but barely. Then he laid out the options in cinematic language: a Hollywood-style extraction raid, flying in a battalion, a deal to negotiate the future of Iran's nuclear ambitions while it was in the weakest position in modern history, or a maintenance strategy, mow the grass, where any renewed activity would be met by another bunker buster. He even quoted Reuters as asking Trump about the uranium, and quoted Trump as saying it was so far underground that he did not care about it, and that it would be watched by satellite. Everything, Waters said, was on the table, and that is where Trump becomes impossible to ignore, because this is not simply a question of hawkish policy. It is also about the man at the center of it, a man who treats misdirection as genius, contradiction as flexibility, and chaos as branding. Waters explicitly said the president was using misdirection to keep the Ayatollah guessing and even keep Wall Street on board. He brought in Jamie Dimon, who said Iran had been killing people around the world for more than 45 years, had killed many Americans, funded Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and had terror cells in the United States. Dimon acknowledged short-term risk for oil prices and said he was praying it ended well, while questioning why the Western world had fought proxy wars for 45 years. But even there, the subtext was clear. Trump world wanted elite validation for a strategy sold through television warfare, and Trump, as always, wanted the credit for being the only man ruthless enough to solve the crisis, even if the solution was to push the world to the edge and dare everyone else to blink first. The story then shifted toward Europe, and that is where the grievance politics kicked in. Waters said the only ones not on board were the Europeans. He said Britain would only send in the Royal Navy when hostilities were over, and quoted the British Prime Minister saying this was not Britain's war, and Britain would not be dragged into it. Trump, according to the transcript, dismissed that by saying he was not going to tell the Prime Minister what to do, that he could do whatever he wanted, and that it did not matter. Then the rant widened, Britain supposedly wanted costly last-minute arrangements that would drive energy prices through the roof. Germany said it was not their war. France would not allow airspace access. Italy and Spain were being picky with their bases. Waters claimed America had saved the continent from 2 world wars, bailed it out with the Marshall Plan and Ukraine, and now could not even use a base it paid for, all while helping open a strait from which Europeans got a quarter of their oil, while the United States got nothing. Rubio was
over the
then
years,
quoted
trillions of dollars,
asking
and
why
all these
America
American forces
was in
stationed in the
NATO
region.
at all,
If we can only use
why it had spent billions and trillions and stationed forces in the region, if in a time of need it could not use those bases. And then came the line that framed the whole segment. The president is thinking twice about NATO, too. He is considering leaving it. He is expected to blast NATO in prime time and discuss his disgust with the alliance. The message was that NATO had not been a friend when America needed one, that America had never asked for much, and that it was all a one-way street. Behind the scenes, Europeans were allegedly panicking, telling each other an economic crisis on the scale of COVID was coming, while sitting on their hands and waiting for Trump to reopen trade and bail them out again. Meanwhile, the Iranians were said to be launching drones at British tankers near the strait, and their missiles could hit London, not New York. America, Waters concluded, was sick of being Europe's sugar daddy and getting nothing in return. Rubio added that the U.S. depended very little on the strait, and that if Iran decided to illegally control the Strait of Hormuz, that was a problem for the world, and countries around the world should be stepping up and dealing with it. Waters ended by saying the president was convinced that once the operation was over, the strait would open either by force, under a ceasefire, or naturally when the U.S. Navy left. That 47 said this was the final phase, and that gasoline prices would go down when it all wound down. Now here is what that story really reveals. Not a clean triumph, not a coherent doctrine. What it reveals is a television-friendly narrative built around Donald Trump's favorite ingredients: threats, humiliation, transactional loyalty, and grievance. Iran was the battlefield, but NATO was also in the crosshairs. Europe was turned into a villain. Diplomacy was treated as weakness. Unpredictability was marketed as genius. And Trump once again was cast as the indispensable strongman, even while floating ideas as reckless as widening war and walking away from one of the central alliances of the post-war order. That is the problem with Trump in a crisis. He does not just manage events. He turns them into a loyalty test, a ratings event, and a weapon against anyone he thinks failed to flatter him enough. We are anonymous. We do not owe Donald Trump applause for chaos, and we do not owe propaganda our silence. If you want more videos that cut through the performance and get to the power game underneath it, subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with us.